Welcome back to the course that we're currently doing is our soul's journey. And today we're going to look at what happens after life, right? What happens after death. And excuse me. So the way we're kind of going to look at it is we're going to look at a phenomenon called near-death experiences, NDEs, which is when a person anyone here familiar with the term?
Mm-hmm.
Has anyone here ever experienced one?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to share with us, or you don't have to if you don't want to?
Oh,
So before I'll just
Yeah.
I'll just give a definition of what a near-death experience is. So what a near-death experience is when a person is medically dead for a certain amount of time, and then they come back to life. Right? And there's been thousands and thousands of documented cases on it. Did you want to share? You don't have to if you don't want to, but
exactly.
that's fine. Go for it.
But I mean, I was in a car accident, and that was my first time driving in winter up in Idaho, and my car just started doing that, and I didn't know what to do, and I ended up going like up and down into a ditch, and I blacked out, and I don't know how long I was out, and when I came to, I mean, I really thought I was gonna be dead, when it was happening, but then not only was I not dead, but I had no injuries.
Oh,
And I just had, a couple of bruises. My hands went like this on the steering wheel, but nothing else was affected.
wow. And do you have any memories or recollection from when you blacked out?
Um, I think I did at the time, but it happened so long ago,
Yeah.
I don't remember now.
Right. So there is a lot of research on these near-death experiences, right? And there's thousands and thousands of documented cases. And what's particularly fascinating about the research is the research that they do with young children, right? Why is it particularly fascinating? Because if an adult has a near-death experience and then recovers and comes back to life and talks about it, there's always that bit of it is maybe they're influenced by what they've read from other people, right? But when you have a small child, right, who has a near-death experience and then recovers and then talks about what they experienced during that, it's much stronger evidence for what's happening, because it's much less likely that they've read the research or they've read from other people, right? So there's four common elements that people who experience a near-death experience. And what happens is that people who go through a near-death experience will have one or two or three of those four things. And so it's not that everyone who goes through a near-death experiences, and I'll explain to you what those four are, 1, 2, 3, and 4, but that people who go through a near-death experience often experience different things, and those can be kind of collected as one of or two or three of these four common elements. Now, what we're going to do is kind of look at that near-death experience and also look at what Judaism teaches us about what happens after death and see how it matches up. Okay, so firstly, are there near-death experiences in Jewish sources? Absolutely, right? There's stories within the Talmud of people who were dead and then came back to life. This Mount Sinai, for example. There's always that one person who doesn't switch off their phone during right? And it's me. just for the interest of those that are listening on the podcast and are like, wow. Right. So where we up to? Mount Sinai, Har Sinai, the Jews experienced God speaking to them, and it was such an intense spiritual experience that what happened is that their souls left their bodies, we're told, and then their souls came back to life. Right, so it's interesting that this concept, this idea of a near-death experience, is something that we see in the Jewish literature as well. One of the four elements of it is people who experience a near-death experience often experience like an out-of-body experience, right? Whereas, for example, there are a lot of stories that are told of people who are in an operating room and their heart stops beating and they're medically dead for a certain amount of time while the surgeon or the operating room staff are working on them, and then they will bring them back to life. And afterwards, what happens sometimes is those people who went through a near-death experience are able to describe what the surgeon was doing, right? And they are able to describe it not from like what we would think that if someone was alive and conscious, they would see the surgeon doing XYZ, but it's almost like they're like, let's use the word soul. Their soul is out of the body and looking down at their body and has this view of what the surgeon is doing. And what's fascinating about this research is that what they describe lines up with what happens. Right? You've heard some of this research before, and there's not really another way to explain it other than it's true what they experienced, right? I don't know how else you would explain it. Maybe they went and they did the research or whatever, but right, it lines up, right? So it's giving us all this kind of evidence that what does near-death experience do and what does the scientific research do is it kind of gives us that evidence that helps us understand and believe that there is something after life, right? That life doesn't just stop when a person stops being alive, however you define death, whether it's brain death or breathe, stopping to breathe. In Jewish law, it's when a person stops breathing. That's how we define death, right? Now, I want to show you how the Jewish laws and rituals around death really back up this idea and are really sensitive to the idea that the soul, when it leaves the body at the end of a person's life, is going on a journey. And so much of what we do in Jewish law, when a person is either very close to passing away or they've passed away, is sensitive to the fact that the soul is still somewhat connected to the body, right? Just like, the person who's having a near-death experience and can kind of see what's going on and they're still connected to the body. And we can imagine if they would see the surgeons being disrespectful and neglectful, that would be very painful and distressing, right? Because they can witness it, they can see it, but they're not able to help themselves. They're not able to do anything for it. So what are some of the laws about death and the way we treat the body after? Is anyone familiar with any of the laws?
Yeah.
Tell us some of what you know.
So afterwards, like the Chevra Kadisha and the washing of the body and watching and sitting with the body, saying prayers.
Right. So even before we get to the afterwards, there's the final phase of life is called a gozes, right? Which is when a person is pretty much at death's door. And the laws there surrounding a gozes are quite strict, right? We're not allowed to move a gozes. Why? Because we're not allowed to hasten death, right? And a person at that point is literally at the in between, almost like twilight zone of life, and by moving them or by not being sensitive, then we can hasten death, which, by the way, teaches us about how much value Judaism puts on life, right? Because we're talking about hastening death in moments or minutes, or right, we're not talking about a long amount of time, and this person at that point is not there's not that much that they're accomplishing. But even then, Judaism says life is precious and we don't do anything to hasten death. Then, as Jenny said, after a person passes away, the soul at that point is very much still connected to the body, right? So the body has passed away. The soul is no longer in the body, but the soul is very much connected to it, which is why we have what's called Chevra Kadisha, which means the holy, what's the Chevra? The holy group. A chevra is kind of a group. Have you familiar with the words chevra kadisha, right? It's a holy group, and what their responsibility is they take care of the body from when a person passes away until the burial, right? And I think in English it's called the Burial Society, right? So that's how it's translated, but the literal translation of it is called the holy group. Why is it called holy? Because in Jewish law, the act of taking care of a body and helping that soul on its the body really on its final journey is considered a chesed shel emes, right? An altruistic kindness. Why? Because this is a kindness you're not going to get thanked for, right? The person is no longer alive. They can't say thank you. It's just an act, a pure altruistic kindness. So the body is still connected and can still experience some of what's going on. Sorry, the soul is still connected to the body, and it's can still experience what's going on. So we, as the people that are still alive, are very, very sensitive to this. So there's an idea of shmira, which means guarding, right? The body is someone sits with the body until it from when they pass away until they're buried. And they again, like what would happen there is this, there has to be a lot of respect, right? So they would say psalms, or they would, but it's not a time for chit chat or things like that. There's a lot of respect for here that this is a soul that's slowly making the transition into the next world. Similarly, when a person, if anyone here done a tahara, a ritual preparation of a body for death? So me neither. But then there's a way that the Chevra Kadisha, these volunteers generally will ritually wash and prepare the body for burial. And again, it's done with the utmost respect. There's no chit chat. It's, and afterwards they will ask forgiveness from the soul, right? Because in case they did anything that was painful to the soul, right? And it's again, it's a tremendously sensitive way, and it's all based on the idea that what happens here is a transition, right? The soul is transitioning from this world to the world to come. Similarly, right, if you look at the flip side of an analogy, right? When a newborn is born, right? When a baby is born, we're very sensitive to that baby, right? So there's a lot of talk in medical literature about how we welcome a child into the world and you dim the lights and you're not right. You don't. Why? Because we recognize that what's going on here is a human being is transitioning, right? It's a transition from the mother to being outside, to being in this world. And that transition takes time, right? The most intense transition happens at birth, and then the first few days are a transition, and then the first 6 weeks are a transition, and then the first, I don't know, next 100 years are a little bit of a transition, right? But eventually we get used to being in this world. And it's the same thing here, right? The soul is transitioning into the world to come. And the most intense part of it is that from when a person passes away until burial, right? Which is why in Jewish law, we try and bury the person as soon as possible, as close as possible to the death, because the body can't, the soul. Hello, welcome. Can I trouble you to just grab a chair and from one of the other officers? Sorry about that. We usually have a spare one back there. Anyway,
We'll be good, she'll come.
yes, she'll come. So 1 minute, what were we saying? Where was we?
About
Oh,
varying
right. So
quickly.
yes, so the soul can't really start its transition into the next world until the body has been buried, right? So we try and bury as soon as possible, as close as possible to death, so that the person and the soul is to shorten that transition time, right? Because we want to help the soul move on on its journey. And it's obviously it's balanced with the respect that we give to the person. So for example, if a person is being buried and they have relatives elsewhere, right? And it would be very important for that for the relatives, for them to be at the funeral, then they'll delay burial, right? Because it's the balance. But the idea really is that the soul is still connected. The soul can't really start the journey until the body has been buried. Then what happens is that the body is buried, and by the way, that the body is buried, and then the first what takes place in Jewish law is the 7 days of Shiva, right? The 7 days where the relatives, the direct relatives, suspend normal life and they just sit and they mourn, right? And again, when you look at the laws and the customs of mourning, you'll see a dual sensitivity here. There's a sensitivity to the person who has passed away and the soul that's making that transition into the next world. And there's a sensitivity to the family members, right, who are going through their mourning process and their bereavement and their grief. And the first 3 days are considered more intense, right? This again is when the soul is kind of hanging around the Shiva house, right? More intensely. And some of the laws about it is that like people who are closer, right? So if you're just a casual acquaintance, wait till the fourth or on day. But if it's
So interesting.
it is interesting, right? Because it shows us that, you know, if you think about it from someone who's lost a loved one, right? Who do you want with you at that point?
Family.
Your family, close people.
Necessarily. Saying me in particular, I'm just saying not everybody feels that way. Some like friends are closer than family.
Right. It's not a function of
That those first couple of days of Shiva, it feels harder to receive people that you don't know well.
right. It's not a function of a relationship to you, it's a function of closeness.
Okay.
Right. So if you're a casual acquaintance, right, of someone, then if God forbid, someone loses a relative, right? They want the people that they're close to. Do they want someone, a casual acquaintance who they don't maybe speak to once a year when they meet in a store and be there in the deepest moment of their grief? No. Right. So then you come I mean, again,
Because I'm unique.
again, everything is individual,
Right.
and there's no one rule that things, and it's not a law you must not go, it's a sensitivity that Judaism kind of
No, it's beautiful.
says is that if you are close to the person, go within the first 3 days, but if you're not close to the person, then wait a little bit, right? And again, people can want different things, and that's fine, and they can hopefully have friends that will communicate that to others. And again, like the big part of the Shiva process is to go and to talk about, allow the people to talk about the person that's passed away. And again, there's a dual sensitivity there as well, is because for someone who's going through that mourning and that grief process, it's good to be able to speak about the person that's there. And then the soul is also there, right?
Yeah.
So if we talk about that person in pleasant ways, right? I mean, it's not the time to bring up, right? Like, things that the person wouldn't want to be discussed. But if we talk, nicely about the person, this type of things that we in eulogy, it's a comfort for the soul as well, as it kind of makes its transition into the next world. The next 4 days of the Shiva, the soul is transitioning a little bit away from the Shiva house, and it's moving on into the next world. And again, the first 30 days are also, right? It's and I want to talk about the mourners and because some people here might know is there's 30 days of mourning and there's 12 months of mourning, right? So there's Shiva and there's 30 days where this is for any direct relative, a child, a sibling, parent, God forbid, like anyone that's direct relative keeps 30 days where they would not listen to music, not attend weddings, not have haircuts. There's a transition back into regular life, while at the same time a recognition that it's not the same. Life is not the same, right? There's a process that they're going through. And then sorry.
Well, is it for the Shiva to be held at the deceased person's house, from what I've heard? Is that important? or-
I'm not sure. What have
Oh.
you heard?
That the Shiva is held at the house where the deceased person was
Live.
living, you know?
I'm not sure. I'd have to
I've
check
heard that
that.
too.
Okay.
The soul will hover, reside in the area where they were living. Many times logistically, that's not appropriate if they're in the
Right.
nursing home or that, and so then it's the next closest place where that deceased person would have felt comfortable. Usually that's the nearest relative's house.
Right.
So, but yeah, it's that sensitivity of like the soul is going to gravitate towards the
Mhm.
places where it
Mhm.
was at home.
Right.
Mhm.
Thank you.
How would it work in
yeah.
cases where Shiva's happening in multiple places? Like, I'm just thinking of like something
Yeah.
happening right now.
Mhm.
Where, like, you can imagine when families are close, but they're separated by oceans.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't know, and I should check it out, but we have to also understand that a soul is not a
Yeah.
physical thing, right? So it is possible that the soul could be,
Yeah.
in things, and so I'm not 100% sure though on that. That's just thought that comes to my mind, but I
Also, it goes back to what you said, it's the balance of the sensitivity to the mourners as well.
Right.
That it's where they feel the most
Yeah.
comfortable.
Yeah.
And if they can't travel or,
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
that they still. We're still sensitive to their grieving process wherever they may be.
Right.
yeah.
And maybe the soul is in the family members that are seeing Shiva.
So it's connected to, I wouldn't say it's in. I mean, it depends how you define in, right? But there's definitely a connection, right? There is some sort of connection, and it's hard to kind of like, I think when we try and put physical term to a spiritual being, right? Like it is in, right? That in is a space thing, and a spiritual being doesn't have time or space connected to it, right? Now for a parent, a child keeps for a parent 12 months. Does anyone know why the discrepancy of 30 days for another family member and 12 months for a parent?
So I always thought it was 11 months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good
I mean, I feel really bad. I've lost both parents and lost siblings, so I was like, this is gonna be a very
Okay,
hard lesson
so-
to learn.
11 months
Is when you say cottage.
is when you say
Right.
Kaddish, right? And we'll talk about
Right.
why we say Kaddish for 11 months. 12 months is the laws of mourning, right? Which are
I thought you could, okay, I didn't remember because it's been a long time.
right. So, and we'll talk about why when we talk about Kaddish, we'll talk about why it's specifically 11 months. But I just want to clear up something that sometimes comes up with why parents 12 months, and someone loses a spouse, God forbid, or someone loses child or a sibling, and it's only 30 days. It's not because Judaism thinks that losing a parent is that much more painful than any of the others of the other relatives. Exactly.
Mm.
It's part of the mitzvah of kibbud of the aim, right? Which is respecting and honoring parents, right? So we have a mitzvah as human beings to give a certain level of honor and respect to our parents, which over and above any other human being, right? Because we're supposed to have gratitude for the fact that they gave us life, even if they were flawed, because all parents are flawed and imperfect. So talking about generally healthy relationships, there's a mitzvah to give respect and honor to a parent. And part of this mitzvah is that when a parent passes away for 12 months, we reduce our joy, right? We reduce the things that bring us joy for it as a sign of respect, which is 11 months longer than for any other relative that someone would do that for. Any questions, any thoughts on it? Okay, so now let's talk about the Kaddish one. So why do we say Kaddish? What's the idea of a Kaddish?
What's the what, I'm sorry?
Idea of Kaddish.
It's the soul, the soul can't do any mitzvahs, it's done. It's done everything that it can. Kaddish is an opportunity to help, even after the body is gone, the soul elevate.
Right. So there's an idea that the Talmud talks about, which is that a person is not supposed to go into a cemetery with their tzitzit hanging out, right? With their, like, sort of flaunting their tzitzit, right? The tzitzit is the four-corner garment that men wear, which has those strings on it. Now, why not? Because the Talmud says you can't mock the impoverished. A person who has passed away, as Jessica told us, can no longer do any mitzvahs. Nothing. There's nothing in the world they can do. They can't pray. They can't wear tzitzis. They can't say hello to anyone. There's nothing they can do anymore, and that's a bit painful. That's painful for them because that's it. Our potential is wherever a person passes a thing. That's where the potential has thing. So we as living people don't go in front of their face kind of thing and flaunt in a cemetery, right? However, as living as loved ones of someone who has passed away, and this is regardless if you are if a person is related by blood or if a person is just connected to it, one of the things that we can do is we can do kindness, we can do a mitzvah, we can learn Torah in their merit, and that helps elevate the soul. Now, next week, we're going to talk about the life review, right? And we're going to talk about what happens to a person, to a soul that's done things wrong in this world. And we're going to also spend a week talking about heaven and hell, right? Gehenna, which is hell in translates as hell, but it's, I don't know what your yes, we're gonna delve into it into what it is in another session because it's a whole discussion in itself. For this purpose, when it comes to learning about Kaddish, we have to understand this, that purgatory, right, Gehenna, hell, whatever we want to call it, is temporary, right? Meaning even the worst person is 12 months. Now, every time we say Kaddish, it relieves the soul of a little bit of that purgatory, right? Now, we don't want to say Kaddish for 12 months for someone. Why?
Sound like they're considered a bad person.
Because it sounds like we think they're a bad person, right? Like, we're like, oh, well, oh, gosh, that person, they need 12 months, right? So the law is we say it for 11 months, for everyone. Right? Because it's a little bit disrespectful to say it for the full 12 months. Now, if a person isn't saying Kaddish for someone, right, there's still a lot we can do. We can give charity. We can pray. We can say a prayer and have them in mind. We can take on a mitzvah. We can light Shabbat candles. Whatever mitzvah we do in memory or in merit of someone who has passed away is a merit for their soul.
So you're saying that only the parents, we do it for 11 months, and then all the others, we do 30 days, or?
No.
No.
So we say Kaddish for our parents. People say Kaddish. Okay, let me try and phrase this properly. Kaddish is traditionally said by the children of a person, right? And if you think about it, why? And it's traditionally said by the sons of a person, right? Why? Because the greatest influence we have, and therefore the people that will bring us the most either pleasure or pain in the next world and in this world as well, are children, right? Now, if a person doesn't have children, right? Or they don't have sons, then other people can, right? Or sometimes for whatever reason, a child can't or won't, whatever, and we can put there are organizations that you pay them and they will say it for, right? So it's traditionally done by children, by sons, right? As a sign of respect, and also because that's who we influence the greatest, right? That's who the greatest influence we have on. Now, so that's traditionally done by a child, but if a child's not there, then someone else can do it. And that's traditionally done for 11 months for everyone, right? Now, separate to that are laws of mourning, right? Which is, for example, for the first 30 days, and it's more intense for the first 30 days for children too, is a person's not allowed to wear new clothes, they're not allowed to get a haircut, they're not allowed to listen to music, to live music, they're not allowed to attend weddings or certain events. That's for the first 30 days a person does for a blood relative, for like a direct relative or a spouse or thing, and then for 12 months, right, for the next 11 months after that 30 days, there is children keep laws of mourning for a parent.
But you could say, like, if it's, say, a sibling or something,
That's
you would,
30 days.
you would still say cottage for 11 months for the sibling?
Yeah, if a person is saying,
Hasn't.
yeah,
We
if a
need it
person
said for
is,
them for
Okay,
the
so it's
11
just the
months.
cottage is the same for everyone, it's just the
Yeah.
morning
The obligation.
of the music and all that. That's
Right.
30 days
Exactly.
for the-
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And again, the reason being because it's a respect thing, right? It's
Sure.
part of it's part, yeah,
Question. And I'm
absolutely.
sorry, you know, my questions are out there, so.
Let's hear it.
She's prepared. But so, like, for example, I hired somebody to say cottage for my brother. And for the 11 months. I'm sure this person is saying it for like 20 people. Like, do they sit there and they say these people's names before they start? Do they read them? Like, what does that look like? Or does it not even matter? Just because you paid, it's done and the person's saying cottage. Do you know any part of
I
that?
don't know the details, but I know that it's a very acceptable and way to do it. Like it's
Right.
completely authentic.
Well,
So I
know, but
yeah.
it just, I don't know, it just seems a little odd.
Well, it's if you think about it, what's happening is either you're paying someone to do it for them, and that person is taking it on and doing it, right? So in Jewish law, there's something called shaliach, right? If you want to do a mitzvah and you can't do it for whatever, you can appoint someone to be your shaliach, your messenger to do it for you. And it's the same thing as in real life, right? Let's say, you need a letter delivered, right? From the person lives in New York. So you can't get on a plane and deliver it. So you go over to FedEx and you appoint them to be your messenger to do it, right? The letter gets delivered, you pay them a certain amount of money and it's done, right? So it's the same idea here that you want Kaddish to be said for this person and you appoint them now and you're paying them to do it. And now they're doing it on behalf of this person. And now this soul will benefit from what you've done.
I mean, I don't know if this has any validity, but my personal interpretation of how I imagine it would be done from the hiree, the shaliach's perspective, I imagine it's probably similar to like if you're saying you're Yotze for Kiddush or Hamotzi, right? That person who is saying it just has in mind that they are keeping everyone
Right.
of this list of 20 names or whatever as they're doing it. But it doesn't need to be like necessarily them reading all of the names on the
Right.
list, or maybe it is, I don't know. But it's like the intention
Right,
as they're saying it.
thank
Sure.
you.
Can anyone say, so let's say, I was just thinking about this because oftentimes if you say like. Somebody has multiple children, they're gonna have a lot of people saying Kaddish for them. Is it a thing for people to say Kaddish for someone who's not a blood relative? Not because they're being paid, but because they feel a connection to this person and they wanna say Kaddish for them?
You could do that. I
Or is
It might be
not a
problem-
nightmare, like that's a.
well, if you do it, so what Jessica's talking about is a neder, right? A vow, right? So Jewish law puts a lot of emphasis on vows, right? Like it's very hard to break a vow. And there's different ways of making a vow. A person can say, I'm going to do this for X amount of time, and under certain circumstances that becomes a vow, and then they're obligated to do it. The other way to make a vow is if you do something 3 times consecutively, right? A good it's called a minhag tova, right? Like a good custom 3 times consecutively, without having in mind that you're not going to make it a promise. That in itself can become a promise. I'll give you an example, right? Let's just say someone decides to give charity before they light candles, right? And it's a nice thing to combine mitzvahs, right? So they do it 1 week before lighting Shabbat candles, they give tzedakah, and they do it a second week, and and then they do it a third week, and they don't have in mind that I'm doing this bli neder without a promise. It could, whatever, everyone should check. If you're ever in that situation, check with whatever, but it could possibly be that they're now obligated to continue doing it. So the best way around it is to just have in mind, I'm doing this without a promise, right? And that's where, if you've ever heard the words bli neder, anyone's heard the words? That's where it comes from, right? When people say bli neder, the real, sometimes people say bli neder, if you've ever heard the lingo as in like, I'll try kind of thing. But really what bli neder means is I'm going to do my best to do it, but I don't want to take it on as a promise, right? So, but it's actually a good practice to get into, to just think, have in mind, I'm doing this, I'm going to try and do it, but I'm not, this is not a promise. But what we got slightly off there. So what were you saying?
I'm just thinking in terms like, I was thinking like, if there's a big rock, like saying Kaddish for this big rock for 11 months seems kind of silly, but, and then I was thinking, all of his Talmidim might also be saying Kaddish for this person. I mean, it's possible the person had a big impact on your life, you want to say Kaddish, you might want to. Is that a thing?
I don't know if it's a thing, and I think it's also important to bear in mind that saying Kaddish is a big commitment,
Right.
right? I think if someone has parents, it might be slightly problematic to say it. I'm not 100% sure. Again, it's something that I would have to check in.
If somebody else says it, why would they think, oh, not, wouldn't it help lift the soul even more?
If their parents are still alive, we're talking about, because it might be seen as slightly disrespectful.
Oh, so like if the person that's saying Kaddish for someone else and their parents are still
Right. So
alive.
again, that might be slightly problematic. I don't know the details of it. So
But
again,
what if, God forbid, like they lost a sibling? Why couldn't they say it?
I don't know what I don't know what the situation is.
State question. Yeah, so this is far more complicated than I thought.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah.
But yeah,
Along the same lines, though, what about the daughters that are female, just in general? Does it carry the same weight as a woman saying Kaddish for somebody else? Or is it like, oh, it doesn't even count because you're not obligated to daven 3 times a day?
so
Or
it
like,
counts, but then you end up, I had a question, I asked a question about this. You end up in a situation, let's say that you take it on and.
or if I'm just
And
gonna
you're
say it on
davening,
Yom Kippur for
then-
Yizkor. It's not
Right,
like taking it
yeah.
on all the time,
But
or
just
even,
because it's different, yeah, because taking it all the time, then you're getting back into the nether situation, because then you're
Right.
taking on both Kaddish and taking on going to Minyan 3 times a day for the rest of your life.
right.
Yeah.
For the rest of your life.
For 11 months.
Yes, because
You
you're
mean for
going,
11 months?
no, because you started going.
Because
to
you
Minyan
started
for
going to
11
Minyan
months.
3 times a day, so now you have to keep
And-
going to
and it's
Minyan
not
3
like
times a
high
day.
five.
Okay, this is exactly.
And I also I want to share something. You bring up women, right?
My life was the way it is.
Session two. We're sticking around for that, right? Okay, so I want to share something with you, right? Because if someone has someone that they loved, or and you're wondering what can I do, what can I do? The thing is, God tells us, the Torah tells us that Hashem counts when it comes to merit, when it comes to reward, Hashem counts for 1,000 generations, right? Which means that, let's just say you have a friend, right? Or let's say a person has a friend, right? And this friend was always very charitable. and the friend passed away, and the person's like, wow, my friend was so charitable, I'm gonna give charity in her merit, right? And she gives charity, and her kids sort of see that, and her kids give charity. All those times of charity is considered a merit for that soul, right? So the thing is to bear in mind is Kaddish is a very holy prayer. It is absolutely a very holy prayer, and it's a custom that we do to help the soul. It's not the only way we can help the soul of a loved one, right?
Yeah.
Any sort of mitzvah that we do, anything that we take on, anything that we do is a merit for that person's soul, especially, if we're talking about like a parent, pretty much everything, because our parents influence us in so many different ways. But especially if we just have the thought in mind, right? Like, I'm doing this for the merit of that soul. So there are multiple ways of bringing benefit and merit to a soul that has passed away.
The case that I asked about was
So did we ever
St. Cottage, where I looked at it like the solution was, okay, you're lighting Shabbos candles anyway, you're not bringing them in nether by lighting Shabbos candles again. So if you make a declaration before you light Shabbos candles, you're doing it in the merit of that person. Well, there you go, that relieves you of that.
Right. So
But I get
and
that
it's
there
the
are
thing.
other
Yeah.
things that can be done, but does that mean that if a woman is saying the words of Kaddish during a davening, does it not have the same impact as if the son was saying it? If the daughter says it instead of the son?
I did cottage for both, well, at least my second parent that passed away, though I wasn't quite there every day, and I wasn't there 3 times a day.
So let's say you just want to go on their yard site, right? I'm not gonna take on a netter of doing something spectacular, right, whatever, but. For Yisker or for a yard site or something like
So
that.
Yiska's different. Yiska's different because Yiska is men and women
Mhm.
do Yiska, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not just, and incidentally, if you're not in shul, you can do Yiska at home,
Right.
right?
Yeah, 'cause
And
we don't
what's
say Kaddish.
what's
No, you
what's
do.
Not
Not
in
in
the
case-
Orthodox, not in your Orthodox.
They don't say
Kaddish.
cottage during.
They only do it in a conservative or reform.
Yeah.
and what
Yeah.
Yiska really is a pledge to give charity for the merit of the soul. That if you look through the traditional text of Yiska, what it really is saying that God, you should recall this soul and you should give it a merit, and I pledge to give charity for this.
I don't promise to do it.
Yes, bli neder, right? That's right. I pledge to give charity in the merit for the merit of the soul without promising, right? Because we're all human and sometimes we make mistakes and sometimes we forget. But really, what is Yiska really is giving charity for the merit of the soul.
Okay, so that may be a bad example.
So and incidentally, if someone's not in shul, you could say that at home. You do not need a minyan for it. Kaddish you need a minyan for, right? So
Yeah.
that's where the complication comes in with Kaddish, right? But Yiska, you could there is added value to doing it in a community and in a shul. If a person cannot get to shul for whatever reason, you can say that at home. Okay, I want to talk about I want to very quickly talk about the two of the other elements that people who experience a near-death experience have experienced, and talk about what it is. One of the other things people talk about is they experience like going through a tunnel, right? And when we look at the Jewish sources, what this lines up with is this idea that the soul is transitioning into another world. And one of the third things elements that a lot of people experience is like a blinding light or a being of light or something. And again, what this is also when we look at the Jewish sources on it, is the idea of the soul being greeted by other souls, right? And the soul being gathered into God's light. And it's interesting is that there's a lot of people who have experienced near-death experiences, and they talk about not wanting to come back, right? Not wanting to come back because the light was so warm and inviting that they actually wanted to stay there. And this light kind of pushes them back and says, no, it's not your time yet, right? You've still got something to do in this world, which I think also teaches us about it, is that we spent time talking about the soul's transition into the next world. That's kind of what we focused on tonight. And we're ending with this idea that even if a soul is being embraced by the next world, right? And the warmth and the light and of the next world, there can still be this, especially if we're talking about near-death experience, this push to be pushed back into this world. Why? Because again, life is a precious opportunity, and it's an opportunity where it's limited, right? Please God, we'll all have long lives, but even within that, yes, even within that, it's a limited opportunity that we get to fulfill our potential and to do good. And that's why sometimes Hashem, a person's having a near-death experience, they may want to stay there, but Hashem's like, no, got to go back because you still got more to do in this one. And what we're going to do next week is we're going to talk about the life review, because one of the things that a lot of people experience is like a flashback of their entire life. We're going to spend an entire week next week kind of looking at it. Is it punitive? Is it benevolent? What is it about? All right, I'm going to open it up to questions now.